Hey you guys, it's Jess. Welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm. I'm standing in my garden now and we are about to do a full garden tour. Today is June the 17th, so things are really starting to get awesome in here. It just rained very briefly, like one of those summer showers that are just enough to, you know, make it incredibly humid. Everything is looking really good in here. Normally at this point of garden tours, I'm harvesting as well. Today I'm not going to be picking just a whole lot because my kids are really eager to get down in here and pick, so we're just going to video it and then I'm going to set them loose on the harvesting. Let's go take a look. The greenhouse is looking good. And then the garden herself is just absolutely lovely. Right up here in the front, this little wild patch. I wish any of this was really productive, but none of it really is. I've got radish flowers, radishes that have gone to seed there. And then here is some lettuce that's bolting, and I'm just letting it. I was going to gather the seeds from that. Some beautiful cactus zinnias. Aren't those lovely? Look at those blooms. They're as big as my hand. Okay, so it keeps sprinkling, so I ran over here to the greenhouse. I wanted to show you something over here we can duck in if it starts to come down again. Here in one of my green stalks, down at the bottom, I had put in a painted lady tomato. Now I have done nothing to care for this thing other than maybe pruning off a couple of branches here and there. It hasn't gotten any of the protective sprays or anything like that, the peroxide sprays or soapy water or anything like that. So it's looking kind of rough, but it does have one funky little tomato. This was obviously a fused blossom, but I figured we'd go ahead and give this a try. A little bee was following me in here. I read this thing the other day on Facebook and it said, I used to see a bee and I would be like, ah, a bee, and now I'm like, hey, a bee, can I get you anything? A pillow, a drink, anything at all? That's exactly how I am now. So I've actually already eaten one of these painted ladies, and this one's got some kind of funky spots, so I'm just gonna taste it. These tomatoes are as good as I'd hoped. Now I don't typically like saladette sized tomatoes, which are like the 2 to 4 ounce globes. I like cherries or big slicers, and this is definitely in the saladette category. However, the thing that I've noticed with the painted lady is that it really doesn't have a lot of seeds. I wish I had a better example. This one was fused together, so it's kind of funky. But you can see here that this is a meaty little tomato. It's not full of seeds and gel like so many of this size are. I had one the other day that was perfect. It was perfectly shaped. It was perfectly, it didn't have any weird spots on it like this one does. Like, check that out. That's a lot of meat for a little salad tomato. And the flavor is really good. It's very sweet. Not a lot of acid. I'll grow it again. I was nervous. I was really hoping that this was going to be a good tomato because I was so excited about the variegated leaves that I planted several of them, and I know a lot of you planted them after hearing about them from me. Now, it's a Wild Boar Farms variety that was developed by Brad Gates, and he just released this one this year. And the tomato itself is really pretty streaky, but the flavor's good. This is a good tomato, and I'm glad because I think it's in a lot of y'all's gardens. All those funky spots on that tomato is why I don't usually let fasciated blossoms grow, because you get little crevices with rot in them and you end up losing parts of your tomatoes. Well, phooey. The rain came tumbling down. And right on down here, past all the bolting lettuces, are the Tania's pink potted beans. And there are quite a few on here right now, ready to be picked. At this point in the garden, I've picked gallons, probably 2.5 gallons of beans just off the plants that I've got. They've been very productive. These Tania's pink pod, the purple potted, you can see they're really loaded right now. Those all are ready to be picked. Now these peppers and eggplants, I've got all different varieties, and they're all really starting to come in and kind of like join the party. I've got baby peppers on a lot of these plants. The nasturtiums at this point are starting to struggle with the heat. I've got quite a few flowers on them, but here you can see, there's a pepper. That's a Hascaria hot pepper. Here's some babies here. See how cute, that's a jalapeno. Tons of beans on these plants. You can see them up in there. It's time to pick again and go ahead, and these will all go in the freezer. Now here I've got some of the Czech black peppers coming up, and you can see this plant's kind of sickly. I'm going to do a very diluted hydrogen peroxide spray on this that will hopefully wipe out whatever fungus is going on there. But the peppers are good. Those are going to be picked probably tonight. There are several in there that are ready. I don't have a lot of pepper growing tips. I've been pretty honest about the fact that I feel very inept when it comes to growing peppers. Sometimes they take off and they do okay. Sometimes they struggle and die, and I don't really know why. You guys have given me a lot of tips, and I'm going to be trying some different things. But like with this plant, this is nuts. I've never had peppers before. I had tomatoes before. So we will probably take those jalapenos, and I'll just put them in something like a chili or you know, something like that. Keep them in the fridge, and I'll be able to use them over the next week. Now when I end up with a lot of jalapenos or peppers like that, I'm growing a few different colors of jalapenos this year, as well as the black peppers that are kind of like jalapenos. Those I will pickle peppers like slices for using throughout the year and can those. I'll do cowboy candy, which is candied jalapenos, and I'll share that recipe with you guys when I have enough to make it. And we love stuffed jalapenos with the whole cream cheese mixture inside, and that's how we use most of that kind of pepper, and then of course using and making salsa. But now I don't have enough to do any of those things. I've just got this handful, so they'll just go into regular cooking. Here are some okra plants down here that are coming up. These have not put anything off yet. They're just starting to set their first blossoms. In the corner here I've got some basil and of course some marigold. We've got some more bolted radishes here, which I'm gonna be attempting to harvest the seed pods on these, and some other random stuff in here. There are some seeds that we sowed whenever we were doing our willy-nilly sowing. These are sunflowers right there. Not 100% sure what's going on here, but we'll know when they get bigger. That is basil, cinnamon basil I believe, and then some chives. Here on the end are the golden Jenny cantaloupes that Ezra and I moved over from the kids' garden. Now melons don't really like to be transplanted, so these guys are fairly stunted. They looked dead for a while though, and obviously they're coming back, so I think they're gonna do just fine. This one's looking a little rough than the others, but he'll come along. That is bindweed, which I have to make sure to stay on top of in my garden or else it takes over. And this is the Chrysanthemum Melon. It has not really started vigorously climbing. I keep wrapping it back around there. Hopefully at some point it'll take off. Purple beans are kind of eager to hop over here onto this trellis. Now throughout this blank space I've got some different seeds popping up from where Benjamin and I sowed seeds all over. Tons of beans to harvest. Here is the next wave of pole beans that I've sowed here coming up. These are rattlesnake pole beans. So they'll fill in the blank spaces, and just as these other pole beans are finishing out, they'll be filling in, which will be really nice. Here we've got more pepper plants coming along. Here I've got a couple more of those Hascaria hot plants. So it's my first year to grow these. I got the seeds from Baker Creek. And I don't really know how hot they are, but I'm hoping that they'll make a nice chili powder. Either way, they're very early producers. They have more peppers on them than really any other kind, aside from maybe a couple of jalapenos. Here the Kajari melon is coming on up. It'll have this trellis covered in no time. The other side is a little behind it because I had to re-sow it after some pests, but it'll be good. Now here I've got a couple of calendula plants. Now calendula is medicinal. It's really, really good for your skin. And what you can do, like if I wanted to harvest these and dry these, I have a lot of dried flowers in the house right now, so I'm not sure that I'll do that. Right now I think they may be more valuable to me, adding beauty to the garden. But you just pinch these off, preferably in the morning, shortly after they open up, and just put them. Oh, well, look at that. I'm harvesting calendula after all. I broke it right off. So we're going to put these face down just like this, just on a towel or something in an area of your kitchen or pantry where they can actually dry. And after a few days when they're good and dry, you can put them up like in a jar. what I usually do is I leave them laying out, and then once I have a jar full that are dried, I'll go ahead and put some oil on it and infuse them into the oil. That's what I use these for primarily. Now, the reason why you don't just take the fresh flowers and put them into the oil is because you could further risk spoilage because of the moisture that's in the flowers. So it's best to go ahead and dry them out and then infuse them in oil. And that's what I do with calendula. And then if you make soaps or salves or anything like that, you use that oil in place of just regular oil. And so it has the infusion in there. I'll just leave that here for the time being. Right next to this calendula, I've got some borage that volunteered, as well as some zinnias that I planted. So this will be just like a nice little hodgepodge mix of color. Now, this may be the most exciting area of the garden this week. I'm really hoping that by next week, I'll be able to report to you that I'm picking ripe tomatoes off of these rows. We're not there yet. We've had ripe cherries and a couple of little ripe saladettes, but none of the slicers have even started to blush yet. Look at these, they're getting so big. Let me check that out. Those are some big tomatoes. And they're already all so distinctive. Now, if I had to guess which was going to ripen first, these Italian heirlooms have started to change color a little bit. They're changing to kind of to a different green. And then the Dr. Witchies there at the entrance, they are just huge. But honestly, a lot of these others are catching up. They're just big tomatoes. So I really don't know. We have so many. This bunch got so heavy it started to bend the stem that was holding it up. So I just set it on a rock so it wasn't laying in the damp soil. Hopefully those will go ahead and ripen. Look at these clusters of white tomasoles. I honestly don't remember the tomatoes ever looking this good at this point of the year. They're relatively healthy. There is some yellow spotting, and I'm going to be using Gary from the Rusted Gardens diluted hydrogen peroxide mix throughout the season, hoping that I'm going to be able to keep my tomatoes. Here in the humid south, whenever we have like what just happened, this quick rain shower that did little to nothing to actually water the garden, but just got all of the foliage nice and moist, and then now the sun's back out again. It's so humid. It's so humid. It's uncomfortable for me. I can only imagine what it's like for these tomato plants. So it's hard. It's hard to keep blight away. It's hard to keep fungus away. I'm hoping that spray will help, but I feel really good about this tomato year. I'm ready for them to start coming in for fresh eating, for putting up, for salsa. I was just talking about how it's almost time for salsa.
Finally put those tomatoes to good use.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for bringing the water.
Yep, water this time, no coffee.
Yeah.
Gotta stay hydrated in this kind of weather.
This bed over here is gonna be undergoing some change here soon. The broccoli and then the 1,000-head kale, they've been pretty pest riddled, and it's starting to get a little hot for these things. Now we've been harvesting them heavily and putting them through the juicer because some of the leaves have had some damage on them. But I've actually already put some seeds in the ground where I'm going to cut these at the base, allowing the roots to break down in the ground so they don't disturb the seeds that are there. And that way, once these things are out, there'll already be something else coming up underneath them. Here, there's some borage, some zinnias that volunteered. Obviously, the tomatoes are doing great over there on the other side. We've got some beans and peppers here, and still a handful of beets there in the middle that we've just picked as we've needed them. I'm hoping to have enough going in this bed that when these big major things come out that it doesn't look too terribly naked. On the other side of this tomato row, it's looking pretty good, I think. This holy basil is getting big. If you watched my garden tours last year, you know that I'm a huge fan of holy basil. It's also called Tulsi, and it is a wonderful, wonderful herb, great for making tea. That's the main way that we use it here in my house, is just hanging it to dry and then steeping it for tea. It's got a lot of medicinal qualities, and it smells amazing. The pollinators love it. It's always covered up in bees and butterflies, and it grows like crazy. So if you've planted a little bit in your garden this year, you're probably experiencing the fact that this gets really big really fast. But it smells so good. Every time I walk past it, I just rub my hands through it and smell my hands. It's my favorite smelling thing in the garden by far. Peppers here. These peppers got pretty tall and leggy. I don't claim to be a pepper expert. I actually just pulled the garlic out right here today. So I've got to figure out what's going to go in this little spot. Oh look, I missed one. Oh, that was a puny little head. We'll put this here with the rest of these. I'm going to hang those in my basement to cure. Here is the red Russian kale. We've been picking on this. That's been going in the juicer and will be very heavily for the next week or so. At some point the kale will bolt. So we get to where we just start juicing it a lot at this point. We just want to use it up before it starts to bolt. However, right at the base of this kale, I've already planted some more squash, which will be really big, so that whenever it comes time to take this out, there will already be something there filling in the space. These are dahlias, looking really lovely. And then this is actually one tomato plant, my one tomato plant in the garden that I will not prune this year. And I usually do that. I usually just let one tomato plant go wild just to see what happens, and also just as a reference to show why I prune. Last year, basically my experience was that the plant got really big and I did get a decent harvest off of it, but the fruits were never huge, and they also, I ended up losing a lot of the fruit to like rotting spots and sickness and stuff. So we'll see. That was a volunteer. That was a Paul Robeson. I'm assuming that's where the Paul Robeson was last year. So we'll see what it is. It doesn't have any fruit on it yet. It's actually just beginning to set its first flowers. And then here next to it is the massive volunteer ground cherry, which is much further along than all the ground cherries that we planted from starts. Volunteer plants are just typically very strong. I'm actually feeling hopeful that I might have enough ground cherries this year to make jams or, you know, desserts, bake with them. I've been told that there are lots of great things that you can do, but last year we didn't have enough. They never even made it out of the garden between Maya and myself and the kids. But we have several plants that are just going wild this year, and I'm really hoping that we get some big harvests. I didn't realize how great my variegated basil was doing until someone commented on the photo of it when I first planted it, and it's like quadrupled in size and I didn't even notice. This basil is beautiful. It's also very spicy. It is a very spicy basil, not at all sweet. I think it's going to be really good in like marinara sauces or something like that that can really carry a little bit of a kick, but I don't know that I would do this in a pesto. I really like the flavor of traditional pesto, and I don't know, this is a kick in the mouth. I love this space right here. It just makes me really happy. It's so pretty. Got some little babies coming up in my Greenstalk. Here's a little tomato here. It's looking pretty good overall. Here I have a curly leaf mint. Y'all, look at that worm crawling along the garden bed. Little dude, I think you got lost, man. I gave him a little help down. I think he'd made a bad decision. And here on this side I've got my variegated mint, which I need to go ahead and pick out the parts of that are coming in solid. These Titan sunflowers are towering over me now. And like this one hasn't even started to form a head yet. It's just huge. These things are gonna be huge. So the blue butterfly peas are really taking their dear sweet time, and it may be that they're just too crowded here. I don't really know. I'm kind of getting tired of waiting on them to cover this trellis in this most beautiful place in my garden. And I'm considering sowing something that might climb and cover it a little bit quicker. Maybe like a faster growing flower that would fill it out. I don't know. My concern with that would be that whatever I put in there would choke out the blue butterfly peas and then I wouldn't get any of those at all. I would like for them to grow, but man, this trellis being bare right here is kind of a bummer. So what do you think? Would you put something in that would grow quickly? What would you put in to fill in this space? Or would you just be patient because, you know, that's a virtue or whatever? This zinnia patch is absolutely majestic. The queen lime mixes. Oh my goodness, can you even with this? It reminds me of sherbet. And again, I need to start harvesting this chamomile to be able to dry it, much like I said you dry the calendula. But it's just so happy here. It's just so pretty. Finally getting some noodle beans. These will actually be in my dinner tonight. I'm just gonna do, like, I call it a summer saute, just some squash and some noodle beans. You know, sometimes I'll put cherry tomatoes in it and just eat it with some rice. They're starting to come in though, and we'll have lots of these very soon, as well as a handful of larger ones that will be picked here as soon as this video is over. And then on the other side of the trellis, of course, I've got scarlet runner beans that I didn't mean to grow. Isn't it funny how you can really tell the difference here? Like these being so much brighter green and these being darker. I just think it's funny how this trellis has got two very distinctive looks on either side of it. Now on this side, the tomatillos are looking pretty grand, but they're not setting any fruit yet. And here the Thai soldier beans are just filling out really nicely and climbing on everything that I put in here. Now these are not long runner beans. They wouldn't cover an arch, but they are doing really nice with these supports. They haven't set any flowers yet, but they probably will within the next couple of days. So the cherry tomatoes are getting absolutely loaded. And in many cases, they're starting to ripen. As you can see, I've got just a few ripe tomatoes all down here, which my kids are thrilled about. Malia and Benjamin could eat their weight in cherry tomatoes. Malia was pretty excited to discover this morning that the Brad's atomic grapes were starting to turn. That one's not quite ready yet, but soon. Here we've got more massive sunflowers. The peppers in the bags are doing really well. Here is a white cucumber that I got from in my gardener. And I'm really excited about this. I've never grown this before. It's kind of like a pickling cucumber, but it's white. And I should be picking those in a couple of days. More cucumbers here, as well as some cucamelons. This trellis is going to be a little mixed. And here the Bene Kadima watermelon is eager to steal the show. This is 2 plants and it is loaded. As you can see, with tons of little fruits. Now this is a really small melon. They only get to be about 1 pound fully grown. And this thing is seriously just covered in them. Down here towards the bottom are some of the larger ones. They're not gonna get a whole lot bigger than this. So for those of you who are using these arch trellises for the first time this year, or if you've decided to grow melons or, you know, anything like that on a vertical support, the thing that you have to know is that melons, when they become ripe, they separate from the vine. And growing them vertically, when you're talking about small, like personal size melons, you can't beat it. It keeps your plants healthy. It keeps the melons up off the ground so you don't get like a flat side or a rotten side. It keeps them from splitting as much. But you do have to give those melons some support. Otherwise, if you miss the exact moment that the plant decides that they're perfectly ripe, they're gonna fall off, and depending on how far they fall, they could split. Now these ones on the bottom I'm not super stressed about, because if they fall off, they'll just hit the ground 6 inches below them and they'll probably be fine. We're in the garden enough that we should find them before it's an issue. But I will probably start putting some of these in some bags and supporting them before we come back and tour the garden again next week. I just use little plastic produce bags from Amazon. You can use pantyhose. I've heard of people cutting up loofahs and using loofahs. Basically, you just need something that you can put the melon in and tie to the trellis so that whenever it separates, it's supported and it's hanging there. And then you just come cut it down and you've got a nice ripe melon that didn't have to fall to the ground. When I come out here and tie these up, I'll be sure to vlog it and show you guys. And whenever I do have them tied up and I shoot it for a garden tour, I'll show you the bags that I use then. And on the other side, we've got our first Cajo melon, another small personal size watermelon. Oh wait, no, there's another one right there. Check that out, cool. So not quite as eager as the Bene just yet, but we've got a lot of blossoms on here. Now this little corner of the garden unintentionally became very flowered. Of course I've got the cucumbers on that trellis. Here these volunteer zinnias came up. The pink and white, they're just so cheery together. Again, they kind of remind me of sherbet. I stuck some holy basil in the corner, which it'll fill this space up. And this borage is nuts. Look at this. Can you all believe that? Look at the blooms on this thing. This was the one that volunteered, and it's just it's spread out all in this bed. My introduction into gardening, other than like my mom growing stuff growing up, but my first garden, it was edibles. I mean, just I stepped into gardening because I began to understand how broken the food system was, and you know, reading labels. My son had allergies and I wanted to grow food. So actually the first several, you know, gardens that I had, largely they were containers. I did not have any interest in growing anything ornamental. Like, I just couldn't understand why people put so much effort into growing ornamental gardens and flower gardens. I wanted something that I could use. I wanted something that I could harvest, that we could eat. Now, the thing is that with a lot of the flowers and the stuff in my garden, a lot of these can be used for teas, or like the nasturtiums and the borage. Those are edible, but truly, that's not why I grow them. I do not eat like tons of nasturtiums or borage. You know, I use them kind of as decoration in food more than anything, and you know, we'll throw nasturtiums in our salad. But little nooks like this that are so largely flowers, of course, the pollinators love them. They have purpose. But this little space brings me joy. I sit here in my chair in the pavilion and I look over and I just kind of orient myself towards this area. When the sun is setting behind it, I'm just like, that is so pretty. And for those of you who have not put flowers in your garden, I've talked about this. Grow something lovely that you just enjoy being around. I genuinely believe the overall health of my garden is better because the best medicine for the garden is the gardener, and I love being in this beautiful space that's full of color, it's full of butterflies. It's completely changed gardening for me to make space for the beautiful things. So the bed with the lilies. So I was sent some really special lily tubers that I put in here, as well as some other lilies that my mom gave me. And you guys messaged me and told me that lilies can be very, very toxic to cats. And of course, I have 2 garden cats that are always in my business in the garden. I did this as a memorial bed for Maya's mom. And so I was like, man, I don't really want to just turn around and dig it out, but obviously I'm not willing to risk the health of my cats. And the thing was, it's like, well, my cats are everywhere. So if I dig these out, where am I going to put them? I couldn't put them anywhere on the property that I could definitely keep the cats out of. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to erect a little bit of a fence around the edge of this bed and do the very best I can to keep it from being unsightly. I think once the bed is full, it won't look so bad. And just kind of curve it over outwards, maybe with some chicken wire or something. I don't know. I don't really want it to look horribly tacky, but at the same time, I don't want my cats to get in with something that's going to hurt them. Here's some lemon squash, and this plant is looking pretty good. The squash bugs are just awful. It's just a constant battle with them, and occasionally what happens is I end up with a plant that's looking like this. Now with this particular plant, I'm just gonna prune back really heavily the areas that are wilting, but I just don't know if it's going to be able to be saved. My solution to the rampant squash bugs has always been to sow more squash. Just throughout the year, as I pull things out, I'll put more squash seeds in, and they'll come up, and as plants get wiped out, I've got some coming right behind it into maturity. I hand pick, drop them in soapy water. I spray neem oil. I've done diatomaceous earth, but I've never been able to stay on top of squash bugs enough that they didn't inevitably wipe out my squash. And I don't know if that's just the area. I've talked to multiple people in this area that they say just sprinkle 7 dust on them or spray 7, and I'm just not willing to put chemicals in the garden. So I just succession sow, and I end up harvesting a little harvest off of each plant before it wipes out. Occasionally I'll get one that's just really resistant and it'll live past it. The patty pan varieties seem to do really well, and so I've sowed some more of those, and hopefully we'll be able to eat squash all summer. I actually usually don't experience that overwhelming harvest of squash that some people end up with because the squash bugs are just so bad. Here I've got more beans, and then those lovely teddy bear sunflowers coming up back there in the back. Here's my garlic bed. I harvested most of this. I left some of the skinnier stalks, hoping that maybe their bulbs would get a little bit larger. More okra coming on the brink of maturity here. And here these Armenian white cucumbers are setting blossom, so we'll probably have some cukes on that here in the next week. Here are more succession sown squash, as well as some melons. These are purple whole peas right here. Here are the snake beans that I'm trying for the first time. They're looking really nice, and they're coming up on both sides. One side's a little fuller. And behind that is another volunteer ground cherry. My survivor eggplants that made it through the horrific flea beetles, which the flea beetles still just come back. But at this point, these plants seem to be able to make it through. I've still sprayed a couple times with neem, but they end up coming back. But check that out. There's a little eggplant. This is the Casper eggplant. The okra is doing really well. There's been enough for us to harvest, like enough for 1 or 2 people about 4 or 5 times. You know what those are? Those are okras that are volunteering from last year right here in the middle of these eggplants. I'm just gonna leave them from now because that eggplant's still pretty puny, and I'd hate to pull that okra out and then that eggplant kick the bucket. Here's some more beans right there, and then peppers down here. Here I'm cheering on my little cucamelons, hoping that they'll take off. This amaranth got massive. Isn't that pretty? And this row is finally starting to fill in and look like something. I've got melons. I need to go ahead and train these up. Melons do climb, they grab hold, but when you're trying to grow them vertically, a lot of times when they're young, it's good to just take them and gently, without breaking them, weave them on around here. And they'll do the rest. Once you get them started, they'll take off on their own. Oh, the good die young. See? Squash bugs, they got that one little. This one's doing nicely though. These are cukes, dar cucumbers, and they should be putting some fruit off here pretty soon. The Malabar spinach sure doesn't seem to mind the heat. I think it'll take off really quickly. And how about this squash plant? Look, it made its way over and it's actually taking onto this trellis, and I'm letting it because it's wild and I love it. And look at all of those lovely squashes. Look, aren't they neat? Unfortunately, it's growing more fruit on the ground than it is up the trellis, and they get a little bit misshapen. This rampicante gets a little misshapen whenever it's on the ground. Look at those punks, they're everywhere. Well, may the odds be ever in your favor, rampicante squash. Here's some Yamato long cucumbers. This year's garden has been different than years past, and they always are. They always have their quirks, they have their strengths. Sometimes you get bumper crops of something and the next year it hardly grows at all. That's just part of it. I've never been this late on getting cucumbers. Usually I've just overrun by cucumbers by the beginning of June. But I had such a hard time with pests eating them because I direct sowed them. Next year I will probably go ahead and start those and transplant them out, because this year I just had a really hard time with that. Also, like I said, peppers this early is very unusual for me. Now the squash bugs, that's been the same as always. The beans, that's pretty typical, you know, succession sowing beans and already having so many of those. But the fact that I have peppers but no cucumbers is very strange for me. That's never happened. That's never happened in my history of gardening. This row of beans is looking really good. Don't those look really nice? Now, some of you in more northern climates are just now getting your summer garden in, but for those of you who are in the south, in areas where it is warm, know that you can continue to sow squash and beans like throughout the summer. They're quick varieties. I mean, they produce in like 50 days or so in a lot of cases. And so succession sowing bush beans is something that I usually do throughout the summer, as well as, like I said, summer squash, because we lose so many of those. Another thing I recently did is I took a bunch of basil seeds and just broadcast them in different places throughout the garden. And I'm just now starting to see those sprouts come up because here in the heat, I have to pick the basil back a lot to keep it from going to seed, and a lot of times I go ahead and do a second sowing of that in case somehow I miss my basil and it goes to seed. I'll have more basil later on. I feel really good about the garden this year. I think it's doing really well. And truly it's been a hard year. The rain, I know a lot of you had a ton of rain, and for us we've had a lot of rain and sometimes, and then we've had really, really hot days and others. It's just been a hard year. The pests, I'm not the only one. Now, we've had a lot because we've been clearing out our woods, but a lot of you have said you've had horrible pests. We had a really mild winter. So don't be disheartened. I hope that you're enjoying your garden as much as I'm enjoying mine, and I love getting to share this with you. I know I always say that, but I really mean it. Pretty much covered it. I think we missed a few things, but for the most part I showed you the highlights. It's definitely coming along. We're going to start really, really harvesting. This week will be the tipping point. A lot of these tomatoes are going to start getting ripe, and cucumbers are going to start getting ripe, more squash. I'm really going to start developing a lot of meals out of the garden starting this week. I'm going to go develop a meal out of the garden right now. Thank you guys. I bless you. Until next time.